Welcome to the FML podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shamir Sajdev, and some of fintech's hardest hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome everyone to today's episode of the FML podcast. Today I have Karan with me. He's the CEO at WealthKernel. Karan, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool. Well, look, let's start at the very beginning. Do you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey so far, and how you ended up founding WealthKernel?
I'm Sri Lankan born, but I'm Canadian. I'm from Canada originally. I moved here about 12 years ago, roughly. Like many people, I originally came just to do my master's, but then stayed. So I started my career in the UK at Barclays. Went to the graduate program, became a portfolio manager. And that's really where I cut my teeth in the sort of wealth management sector. I think Barclays is a great learning experience for me. Great people. I learned the business. What I also realized there was like the space in terms of the wealth management sector was going to effectively evolve from a sort of predominantly face-to-face space that catered to high net worth into much more of a digital space. Also recognize that a lot of clients who have less assets were kind of underserviced. So in the backdrop of that sort of context, you recognize that this is like when like robo apps in the US were just kind of being launched. Like there was Betterment just came out, and the early days of robo. Nutmeg was still kind of unknown in the UK. I think they were just started, like very, very early days of Nutmeg. And I think that's kind of where the inspiration for WealthKernel came, was really this space is going to digitize. There's going to be so much innovation, and we want to kind of be the infrastructure behind that. Originally, we were trying to help advisors, but we were always B2B, and that's where the name WealthKernel came from. Like kind of ripped it off like the Linux kernel, low-level operating system, or that powers operating systems. Really kind of behind the scenes infrastructure provider that just did kind of the really boring stuff, but that enabled other businesses to do it. And so that's where the name WealthKernel comes from, kernel operating system, sort of, rather than like, say, corn kernel or any other kernels that you think of. And so that was kind of the inspiration for the business, and that existing infrastructure in the market really wasn't built for digital first firms. And specifically, the infrastructure that was in the market was based on low volume, high value customers in terms of processing them, fee structures, and the way we kind of flipped that on its head and focused on providing infrastructure with clients with less assets or low value, and then high volume, because that's the only way the business on top of us would be sustainable. And so to redo all that, we effectively moved away from just advisors into APIs. And fast forward 6 years, here we are as an API platform that effectively enables other businesses to provide savings, investing, and pension services to their customer base.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, how many customers do you now have using the WealthKernel platform?
North of a dozen customers now.
What was your sort of play in terms of entering the market? You created your product, you got out there. How did you go about sort of acquisitioning your first few customers?
It's really hard work. Like the first customers are always the hardest. So we initially effectively built our own first customer. So we built a firm called WealthSmart on top of our infrastructure to show the capabilities of our infrastructure. And that helped us win our first customers, because a lot of the people that made decisions on which providers to go with wouldn't be well versed in the tech side of it. So they would look at our APIs and they couldn't assess it. So they needed to see it in production. So we use WealthSmart to kind of show them, like, there's a front end, it sits on our API. They can use it. They can go on and put real money in on board, do KYC. They can do everything they want to do without having to trust us or looking at the code. And that's kind of how we got started. And then, since then on, we just started just hustling and grinding our way through it, right? Like always trying to do our best to service our customer needs, build features and product functions that no one else really had or wanted. And then I think now we've established ourselves as one of the market leaders in this space. B2B, that's one of the hardest things that people don't talk about. It seems like a great business model because you just do all the back office stuff. But boy, it's difficult to get to scale.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine obviously that you're kind of going in at almost at the very beginning of the journey with a lot of your clients. And so therefore actually finding them and targeting them is actually quite difficult, because it's not like you can just reach out to them on LinkedIn. It's almost a case you have to sort of build it and kind of hope they will come. Although I don't, perhaps hope's the wrong word.
It's kind of true though, because yeah, you're right. Like you don't know who the next aspiring founder is going to be. Oftentimes they're still at their previous role or they're still in ideation stage. There's millions of firms. It's hard to target early stage businesses that are in such a niche space. So we've always focused a lot on, when people want to find us, when they're searching for a custodian, our name becomes available. But the other thing we realize is that when people go into this business, the decision makers often research the space. It's a very considered purchase if you think about it. It's not a very spontaneous purchase. You're not going to buy it just because you see some ad that says WealthKernel. You're going to think months or years in advance, and because of that, you'll study competitors and you'll be at conferences and you'll speak to other people. And I think we've worked really hard at building a reputation that to a point now, I think if you're speaking to anyone in the digital wealth space and you're saying, oh, I'm building a digital investment app, trading app, pension app, whatever, someone's going to inevitably say, you should really speak to the guys over at WealthKernel. And that's most of it, a lot of referrals still. We don't do a lot of outbound.
That point around go speak to WealthKernel, they're the guys to go to. And you talked about, a niche app. There's a lot of trends sort of cropping up at the moment. ESG is one example of that. In fact, that's probably the primary example at the moment. How are you adjusting your product to kind of meet those needs and those sort of changing trends in the market? And how do you anticipate that? Or is it more a case of you're kind of waiting for the inquiry and then building that around the new customer themselves? Or is it kind of a bit of both?
We rarely build for an inquiry. Like it's just, and that differentiation piece that you're talking about, ESG or any other, that's actually led by the businesses that are on top of our platform. For the most part, whether you're buying an ETF that's ESG or another ETF, our infrastructure doesn't actually recognize the difference. It just purchases, it settles, it trades. On the investment management side, definitely, but that's more qualitative. The tech in itself doesn't distinguish between these strategies. We think of what we built as pipes, and the pipes process what goes through the pipes. It doesn't really have an opinion on these things, but that's also the kind of the power of our platform and the fact that we're commoditizing the things that should be commoditized and leaving the things that businesses differentiate themselves for them to differentiate themselves on. Strategy, distribution, the way they manage money, the ethos, the way their proposition marries up with their customer. Those are all things that we really don't get that involved. In some areas we do it, like discretionary managers we might, but for the most part, the things that our businesses rely on us should be kind of commoditized things that it's not going to differentiate them. It's things that it's almost like a cost center for them. We always kind of compare ourselves to like an AWS, but there's some truth to that. Like if you're looking at, let's take three businesses that are both competing for the end consumer, they might all be on AWS because as far as Alteryx are concerned, cloud infrastructure is table stakes to operate. And you're not going to differentiate by building your own cloud infrastructure, and you just kind of want to go with the one that has the most reliance and scale and that works for your cost base. And we're kind of like that. Like we're an infrastructure provider. It's only a disadvantage if you're not using us more so than it's an advantage. Like the fact that if you don't use us, then you're either having legacy tech or you're having to do operationalize things internally that takes away from where you do differentiate. And that's kind of our ethos is that, by partnering with us, it's a competitive advantage versus others because you get the full might of our firm and the focus of our firm focusing on improving things that for otherwise are just another mundane process or piece of infrastructure. And that's why I think we've been successful is that we focus on an area that otherwise people look at as a cost center or just another piece of operation.
With the fact that you kind of view yourself as a commodity, your kind of individual features are commoditized, but fundamentally the package itself, I mean, it's more than a commodity really, isn't it? Because to find the solution, like you said, that you're delivering, you'd have to either build it they'd have to build it themselves or have legacy tech. So I suppose, but what I'm curious in sort of finding out is that what else are you working on? What other pipes are you adding in to your infrastructure to help kind of build out your offering moving forward?
Something in theory, things should be commoditized, but it's not, right? Like kind of going back to AWS thing, servers should be commoditized, but you wouldn't go to Azure or an AWS and say, highly commoditized space, right? You can transform that by just efficient execution and scale and just investing and continuously investing CapEx. So it's like a competitive advantage. You can absolutely, I think, take something that's commoditized and make it less commoditized. Uh, and that's kind of how we feel about our space. And that it's not just any one service any firm can do, but you start bolting it all together and the complexity and stitching it up, then it definitely becomes a competitive advantage to understand that. And obviously, we're a very regulated space, right? Like to cope with that level of regulations in itself, it's kind of gives us a leg above others. In terms of expanding our sort of our pipes, we don't build anything custom for a customer, but we do take the feedback from all of our customers and help us direct stuff. And sometimes we take a very strategic view. So some of the areas that we're looking at the moment are Europe. We're working to get authorized in Europe right now. It's been over a year since we've been working on that, but that's a big part of our growth. Obviously, with Brexit, we can't just passport into Europe the way we would have done before. So at the moment, it's actually all eyes on Europe. It's just a lot of customers. It's underserviced. It's kind of where the UK used to be. I'm going to say like 2-3 years ago at least. A firm like us doesn't exactly exist in Europe now, where there's a lot of we have maybe just under a dozen firms who are just waiting for us to get authorized to go in Europe itself. So it's not building anything sexy. It's just honestly building stuff that's reliable, that's efficient, that works, and that dependable is kind of what we're trying to do. It's not meant to be. This isn't like AI, super sophisticated tech. It's just like we take something that's actually kind of boring and should be commoditized, really make it scalable and make it really easy, as simple as an API to connect to.
Is that kind of your, I suppose, ethos as a CEO? You know, not focusing on the shiny objects that are out there and focusing on, you know, the more rusty objects and just making them better.
Yeah, it's just like Twilio, API-based phone calls and text messages specifically. I think it's Twilio. It's publicly listed, and they've taken something as boring as sending text messages to people and built a billion-dollar business just putting APIs in front of it to make it really easy for firms to send text messages out. And their customers love them because you take something as simple as boring as sending a text message to someone, like reminding them of an appointment. You create efficiency, dependability, good pricing. If you can deliver that, and we can build one good product, I'm pretty happy with that. Like, it's really hard to build good product, and if you can build one or two, like that's all you really need to do. But to do that, it's really hard.
Yeah.
So I'm not the smartest guy, so I'm not going to go around and pick battles in areas that are outside my comfort zone. So we'll take something like portfolio management systems, order management systems, trading custody, all that stuff. And if we can just keep simplifying it and making it easier and easier to use, I think our customers appreciate that.
Just to kind of switch it up a little bit, I kind of want to talk about, I suppose the wider impact of what WealthKernel ultimately delivers, right? Your platform ultimately catalyzes other firms that are focused in perhaps these niche areas to go out and deliver a solution, a product, an offer to, I suppose, different areas of the population. What's your take on that? And do you think that's part of the responsibility of WealthKernel to be able to help deliver that? Or are you a little bit more focused on the nearer term sort of focus on just bringing the customers in?
Directly, our infrastructure is used to serve disproportionately people who are underserviced. We have one of the large Sharia firms. We have a firm focused on the African diaspora. Like, if you look at it from that perspective, we serve probably the most diverse customer base you can probably get in terms of, out there. Just by definition, that our infrastructure is optimized for low value, high volume, which by definition is going to go towards the most underserviced people. So we're aware of that, and that's obviously great, and we do that. But I'm also not going to say like that we beat the drum on that every day, and every Monday we start talking about how we're like saving like small clients. Like, we're going to build the best infrastructure, and everyone benefits from that. Disproportionately, it's going to benefit people who are underserviced. So it's like we get both wins, but I'm not going to say like that's an outcome based on our infrastructure, but it's not like we sit around all day thinking how we can serve. Like, obviously we want to do that, but we're not that type of like social justice like firm. Like, we're just about building really good engineering stuff, and we obviously have a conscious and social, but we're not that way inclined. Like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm that type of person. But I understand that is the consequence of our tech, and we know that, and that's why we want to continue building that. But at the same time, if like someone wanted to come on our platform and build something that helped people invest in, like, I don't know, only oil and gas stocks, I'm not saying we're going to be like, that's the best idea, but we're also not going to do that. Like, we really just focus ruthlessly on infrastructure and delivering and not being opinionated. Like as long as it's not breaking any laws or regulations or causing any issues, like we're not passing judgment or we're not like taking credit for our customers' work. Our customers are the ones who are really taking our infrastructure and servicing those customers. And we know without our infrastructure they couldn't do it, but I don't want to ride off too much on their coattails, if that makes sense.
Makes absolute sense. I think, like you said, I think as a consequence of what you do, it helps that distribution of wealth to a certain extent. And I think, that's a great nice to have. But I also appreciate your honesty with the fact that, like you said, you're not, banging that drum.
Yeah. It's just not our culture. Maybe it's the Canadian side of us. We're very much just like, we get to work, we come to work with a hard hat almost, just like we're going to build good tech, head down, and that's it.
I suppose at the moment, because your product does facilitate that, there are platforms that you're using, like you said, that serve the African diaspora and the Sharia audience. There's going to be a point at which I suppose every niche that can possibly be targeted will have a platform. How quickly do you think your market will become saturated? And with that happening, where would you then take WealthKernel, after that, and how would you move it forward?
No, I don't. I think that's ridiculous because the way I think about it is like if we can profitably service the underserved market because of our infrastructure, we can clearly service the well-serviced market better at a higher margin. Our infrastructure is not opinionated. Once we start growing, we can move into traditional markets and not. But I also think like investments have always been like a blunt object. Like I think you and I were talking before, we were both at Barclays Wealth, broad brand. Everyone has an account with them. If you look at all the customers they have, in that you have subsets of people that have different criterias. And I think what digital wealth will do is allow people to choose if you want a broad camp or broad church provider, or do you want to go to a very niche one. And I think those niches and the broad camp, almost everyone has a niche. Even if you took like, I hate going to like political talk or PC talk, but what someone would think is like mainstream. You took let's say a white male, which would be, I guess, mainstream thinking for like what is non-niche. But if you look at in the US, these are the same men who would like sign up for a credit card because it's from their own football, like or their football club, or they're part of the Sierra Club, or they're part of cycling. Everyone is part of a minority in one way or another. This is why I don't go into that thing. I just don't get in. I don't overthink it. But I've yet to meet someone that is so part of the mainstream that they have nothing about them that puts them in a niche category. They might look like that, but I think everyone in self can be part of a majority and a minority at the same time. So I just think our opportunity size is not just niche fintechs, but it's everyone that benefits from savings and wealth management services. It's not something I lose sleep over.
What are the key areas that excite you about your business?
Solving problems and building quality stuff. You know what I mean? Like there's a certain pride. I know I said like it's commoditized and boring, but it kind of is and it's not. Like the stuff that we do is quite challenging in the fact that if you think of a lot of our college and fintechs, arguably some of the smartest founders and engineering teams are our clients, and they kind of leave some of the really hard stuff to us because doing something how it was done 20, 30 years ago was easy. But if you want to do something more efficient and re-engineer that, that's quite challenging. And I love that. Like I love having and solving problems like that and taking something that's complex and be like, all you really need to do is hit this API and we'll sort it out. And it's like magic. I kind of like the engineering and like I'm not a developer engineer, but I like the fact that we can bring and our employees really deliver that experience for our customers a lot. Adding value when I work, we have catch ups with all the CEOs of our businesses. Like we talk to all of our businesses once a week on average. Some of them a little less if they're more mature. And I'll catch up with the CEOs at least every quarter. And I like helping them build their businesses. It's fascinating me that like I'm kind of like front row seats to them building their business by being a trusted partner and helping them and scale and providing the infrastructure for them to scale their business. Like I really do enjoy that. And I like just going on that journey with them. I know you're involved in some other firms in space, but there's something nice about that, right? You can see how it transforms their businesses and their customers. And, I take a lot of pride in the fact that, we are responsible for thousands of people's savings and millions of pounds of assets. We kind of make the really hard stuff easy and to a point where you make it so good that people kind of look at it as commoditized. Like, I like that, right? You make something look so simple. People are like, oh, it looks pretty easy. I'm like, that's exactly what we're trying to go for.
Yeah, it's funny you say it. Like, I resonated with like a couple of things that you said there, right? The bit about sort of talking to the CEOs on a regular basis and having like a front row seat. I mean, that's what I love about my job. We were talking about a few people that we both mutually know earlier. Getting to have conversations with someone, for example, who's received investment by Y Combinator, it levels you up in your role in your business, and it forces you to think in a slightly different way. But it's also just fascinating to also see how their mind works and how they're building their businesses. And then kind of to the point around making things simple and kind of commoditizing, making hard things simple. It's not just kind of dissimilar to what we do, because fundamentally you can kind of pick up, work with different agencies for all the things that we do, but really where we add the value and where it goes from being commoditized to actually being something that can be measured on value is being able to knit all of those things together, and then having that level of expertise on top of it, and then having visibility over the marketplace, and then being able to deliver that for that customer in a way that they want it, and in a way that they can receive it to actually leverage and grow their business as well. So I'm very, very much on your side. Like I don't consider myself to be like, a massively smart operator, but I'm kind of good at this and I do it well, and get to do some exciting stuff with it as well. Who wants to provide a service line for, say, a boring niche? Like I wouldn't want to do this for dentistry, for example.
You just have to accept who you are, right? Like I know, like this isn't most like what we do at WealthKernel is not for your average person the most exciting thing. Like, and I don't care, but it's exciting to me. You know what I mean? I grew up trading stocks, and I love infrastructure. I love how the markets work. Like, I'm obviously like before this, I'm a portfolio manager, right? Like trading stocks investments for most of my life, and it interests me, fascinates me, and then I think everyone has their thing. I don't judge people on what they like, but my thing is this, and I like it. And I think going back to marketing, it's like because I have such a passion for it. Uh, Most people that meet me, it's like it doesn't take a lot for me to get into detail of our stuff. And if you're building your platform on top of our infrastructure, yeah, like we're not the biggest firm out there, but you'll know that there's a guy there who's probably talking about or thinking about your infrastructure on a Sunday afternoon because that's what he does. And there's a certain amount of comfort that comes from people. It's like, whatever it's worth, like you can set your clock to the fact that I will or WealthKernel will be thinking how to make something better and more efficient, pretty much because that is what they do. And I think a lot of the founders in our reputation kind of comes from that. It's just like they are almost religiously focused on this, and it's like there's a certain amount of comfort people get from that, and I enjoy it. So
you mentioned that obviously you want to enter Europe, and naturally with that comes growth in numbers of staff, and you're going to have to grow as a business. Have you thought about how you'll tackle that kind of company culture where your team are thinking about their clients on a Sunday afternoon? Have you thought about how you'll manage that as you grow as a business? And is that a concern to you that if you get bigger, you'll kind of lose that unique selling point there?
a little bit, not because it has nothing to do with the culture. I think it's just a function of size. So I'd say there's two issues, separate issues. I think as you get bigger, yeah, it's harder for the delta between myself and the employee. Sorry, the difference between myself in terms of number of people and the employee that started. The wider that is, by definition, the harder is information and maybe for information to pass to them. So we need to do a better job of making sure our HR function, our onboarding function, our screening, our values, things that we take for granted when we're smaller, is on point, and we can address that. And that's a different type of challenge, and that's always going to be a battle. But I know you're kind of fighting uphill because as you get bigger, for a lot of people, start feeling just like a job, and it will. It's just there's a correlation between size and people having an effect on the company, and I've been at Barclays and I've been welcome, and to the best of your abilities, it's just I don't say physics, but it's almost just like a rule of law because of it. But the cultural thing, I'm not that I think is bullshit because we have. I think the world's become a smaller place. Like I've lived in multiple countries, and I think as long as you recruit the right type of person, I think we can find the right type of staff and the mentality anywhere in Europe, anywhere in the world. To be honest, like I'm not sure where I get classified into, but we already have almost a dozen staff around Europe, and if it wasn't for their maybe accent, you wouldn't know where they were situated. We've always been remote first. Again, like we have a culture, and we're happy to own it. We're a very direct, work focused first company. We also have a lot of high level of balance. So I want people to spend time outside of work and spend time with their families. And we're very good at kind of assessing the people that would fit into our culture, and we don't try to be people we're not. We just try to be who we are and make sure it's very clear to people when they, even at the interview stage, like this is the type of firm you'll be joining. Try to give them as much insight into that even before they even get to the interview stage, just so they can be like, I don't think a company can be all things to all people. I don't
Oh
think I
yeah.
can be all things to all people. And so the sooner they know that, the better it is for everyone involved. I think people deserve to find a company that resonates with their stage in life, their personalities, and it's always about fit. So, I don't get offended if people don't want to join us or people think it's no longer for them. It's just fit. And so we just try to focus on that. But we've had great success in Europe with hiring talent. There's so much talent in Europe. I think the more and more we spend time in Europe, we realize like there's so much educated people there who don't have as much opportunity that you do get in England. If I can offend someone by saying this, but like if you're someone say in a second city in the UK, which I know like they don't have as much opportunities in London, but like let's say you're in Manchester or Birmingham, you probably on balance probably have more opportunities to be employed in the tech sector than say if you're from like a large European city like I don't know, like Madrid,
Yeah.
right? So when you go there and they have free education and whatnot, and they speak good English because they grew up watching movies or whatever, slight accent, but they understand it. They speak two languages and they just want to work and they want to be given opportunity. So we probably hired more people outside of the UK than in the UK this year.
Okay. Oh wow. And
Yeah, like
and
Brexit, right? Like,
we've got a few staff. We've got a few in Greece and a couple in Spain for the reason that they were the best quality hire. The best at what they do. Amongst the candidates that applied for their roles.
especially with the Greek, like people are gonna judge Greece, but like one of the most mathematically inclined nation, I would say in Europe, like them and the French. I don't know what it is about their education system, but if you look at like a derivative desk on any large European bank, it's like half French, half Greek.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
they don't call when they say the Greeks in derivatives for a reason, right?
yeah, yeah.
It's pretty much their symbols, right? Sigma, beta, gamma.
Um, so you talked about sort of expanding out into Europe. Do you have any sort of plans to kind of go beyond that? Two markets I'm probably interested in at the moment is probably Africa, obviously huge place in itself, and then also Latin America as well. This infrastructure sort of still being built out there, and if you look at how the Nigerian fintech market in the last 2 years, it's come leaps and bounds. Not too dissimilar, say from Brazil. Do you have any sort of intention to kind of get out into those spaces at all?
Oh, 100%. Like one of our directors actually lives in South Africa. What we do is it is very complicated engineering. It's a lot of regulations, and just entering Europe, it has been difficult enough that I kind of got humbled a little bit in terms of being spread out just under because Europe is a collection of countries rather than one nation, etc. Same thing with Africa, right? Like we spoke to clients out in Kenya. Like there's a few hotbeds. Like I know like there's multiple countries, but I can pretty much say they're dominated in three main parts. Like there's Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. Those three I would say account for a bulk of the thing. And then there's like maybe the other, I'm going to say 30% is kind of spread between a long tail of countries like Mozambique. Egypt is the other one I would say the fourth, if I had to choose a fourth country that we somewhat cover. Anyways, there are individual countries to enter from a regulatory standpoint. So kind of going through and dealing with Europe, which hasn't been easy, and understanding the cultural differences dealing with Europeans. And it shouldn't be like, obviously, I was kind of stunned by that because obviously before Brexit, FCA regulations and European regulations are kind of similar, so it should be kind of familiar territory. It hasn't been, and so just that humbling experience dealing with the Europeans and understanding how different it is even between two European countries till this day is kind of reminded me that you just can't arrogantly say we're just going to enter these markets as if you're just going to show up and they're just going to, and that's partly why we haven't. But I would love to do that. One of the reasons we chose, so we're trying to get authorized in Spain, and one of the reasons we chose Spain is because of this special relationship they have with South American regulators and countries. So we'd love to do that, but I've always believed it's better to do few things extremely well than just to overexpand. And that's and going back to like our culture and what we're known for is we do kind of underpromise a little bit, and firms know that we're not going to just sell them the world. We're not going to just be like, oh, we'll be alive in South America. Wait for us in 2 years. We'd rather just do a really good job in the UK and Europe, even if that means we're a little too late to maybe build infrastructure in Africa. That's unfortunate, but at least the markets that we're in, we're going to be known for quality and resilience and do a damn good job rather than just be greedy and spread out.
Just on that point around sort of Europe and kind of like the big differences between two countries, I mean, we help a fair few clients launch into, different markets. And the most common one is, we want to launch into Europe as if it's kind of like one big land, that all speaks the same language with the same regulation. And I think, having that respect for the different regulatory infrastructure in each country and the different languages and requirements, and also understanding the size of each country as well. Germany's equally the same size as the UK, right? It's
incredible. Like when we look at the infrastructure, just different payment rails sometimes, and just everything is different. Like although I've been here for a while, like I'm still kind of new to Europe. Like I have no real bearings to Europe, so when we look at it, there's a lot of bureaucracy. Um, there's a lot of old world stuff, and you almost don't believe that this is a very modern setup of some parts of Europe. Like you're almost like kind of baffled by how old something is or how they do stuff culturally. And that's one of the reasons we're just like, we're going to be years in Europe building. To get to where we are right now in the UK, we're probably going to take like 4 years in Europe. If we can do it in every country, that in itself will be an accomplishment. We like to be complete. So I rather our infrastructure not just cover like the big 5 or 6 nations in Europe, but I want to be in Slovenia to Portugal, right? Like I want to be pan-European. So if you're building a European firm, WealthKernel isn't going to just ditch this like smaller countries because it's not as high margin or high revenue and just go to like Nigeria because that's another. I don't want to do that. Like if we're going to Europe and you're building a European business, I want our business to be confident that we'll do the long tail work to make sure we're holistic and complete, and we'll spend the effort to understand the Slovakian payment rail or whatever for their like 4 million customers on the basis that I think to be an infrastructure provider, you have to do the really big things that bring the money, but you also have to do the little things that for some of your customers matter a lot. And so that's kind of how we think about just our product.
Do you think that's kind of what's been part of, the recipe for success for WealthKernel is, not just stopping at doing the 90%, but delivering that final 10%?
That's a big part of our ethos. Like, and this is kind of the conflict between the supplier and the companies is that we all want to make money. And for us, the last 10% might be less revenue generative than the first 90%. But if you're dependent on the WealthKernel system, there's not much you can do for the last 10% if we don't want to do it. And I'm conscious of that relationship, which is why we think real hard about reputation and how we build with our businesses, and that they're completely dependent on our infrastructure. That isn't lost with us. And this kind of goes back to reputation, why I would rather spend that money on engineers to build the last 10% than say build a glossy marketing campaign about how we're doing all these things and just kind of growth for the sake of growth. That's kind of how we have been building our reputation, is like we take the relationship for the long term and we think really carefully about what we do and what we don't do. And we have those close relationships with our CEOs, so we know the consequences of not doing something for them.
You just mentioned that you'd rather spend the money on the engineers than on the marketing piece.
Marketing people are just important. I don't want to like get some hate mail from people. Like everyone's valuable. Yeah.
No, not at all. No, I think the question I was going to ask is do you think that's kind of been part of the recipe of success for WealthKernel, which is relying on having that complete product that's robust and letting that do the talking for you, as opposed to telling people about it, actually letting your product do the talking? And do you think that's the reason why, you've beaten out some of your competitors?
That's exactly it. Because again, our buyers are very incentivized to choose the best suppliers. It's not like they're going to see an ad or like, we have a really slick sales guy. Fantastic. Rob is amazing. But Rob cannot, even with all his talents, call someone randomly on a Monday and be like, how do you feel like building a robo business today? Like they have to be in that mindset. They have to be in the market to be building it. Like the company they work for, the budget, everything kind of has to align, right? There's very little, as long as when they decide to go down this path that they know how to find us or they contact with us, that is the most important thing. We just need to be involved, or we need to be able to make sure that we make contact with them. Once we make contact, then things are great for us. So as long as the bar is to be that we have a chance to have a conversation, that's all we do need. But the decision makers are very incentivized to check out the handful of suppliers in this market because their whole business is dependent on that. Very few people will build something without speaking to us in Western Europe now in this space, because the very least, you want to just cross this off your list and be like, okay, they weren't relevant, just so at least you know what your competitors are up to. So the engineering and the product speaks for itself. This is not something you can sell by glossing it over. We've paid the price by under marketing, like to be more balanced about this. We hired a fantastic head of growth who unfortunately left us here, but a guy named James Valentine, just fantastic guy who built the growth function, really kind of addressed that and kind of brought us up to now where at least there's been enough PR and fintech to kind of get us there to once you get to that point. But once you're there, we don't need to. When I think about events, like I don't need to be the name that you see when you go to like the Wealth Tech conference. I don't care for that because most of the people in that room are not the one. But the one or two people who are really making the decisions, kicking the tires on the APIs, those are the people that when they do it, I want to make sure that they're really happy with what we have, and we disproportionately invest in that.
Do you mind talking to me a little bit about that sort of infrastructure and that ecosystem that you have to make sure that you're there? What does that kind of look like? I mean, what activities are you doing there to ensure that you're getting in front of those right people?
It's going to sound ignorant of me, but like we don't do a lot of activities to ensure we get in front of them. Pretty much we say is like, if you don't, I'll make sure your competitors make sure you don't have a business, right? Because they'll be using us. Like that's kind of my way of thinking about it, right? Like I'm kind of hoping that the best founders and the best decision makers are the ones who are capable of doing a proper assessment of suppliers, and they will reach out to us because there's only like 2 or 3 of us, right? Like globally, there's probably only like 5. So when you're building a multi-year build, most people will want to speak to the 5 or 4. And from a regulatory permission, there's only 2 in the UK. That's one other firm that can kind of go toe to toe in this space. And so I'm not trying to be cocky or arrogant, but like I don't even know who that person is until they come out and say we're doing digital. Like it's a disproportionate amount of investment. It's kind of like either we go really broad and spray and pray, right? Just everyone we market to like thousands of people in digital tech wealth and investing wealth to hope that we get to the 1 or 2 people. And to do that, we're paying a really high acquisition cost. Or we can make sure that when they're ready to look for a provider, they find us through search or there's content, or they find their name in the terms and conditions of what business we provide. Because of the time it takes to build a business, oftentimes the individuals will talk to people in the system, whether yourselves, VCs, and they'll be like, and people just naturally say, are you guys using WealthKernel? Or you guys should really talk to WealthKernel. Like, and most people will be like, really glad to speak to you. I've heard your name like come up like like many, many times. And so by the time they speak to you, and they're always a bit surprised because the first call usually is with me. And we just love to understand their business and so we know that's working because it's not like, oh, we won't even mention WealthKernel once. It'll be like, man, everyone's mentioned you guys to me. And like, so we know that. And that's kind of what I look for is like how many, we don't quantify the exact number, but it's usually multiple times. By the time they get to us, like, yeah, I've heard about you guys from such and such mentioned this or thing mentioned this to speak to you guys. And so that's why it's working. It's just reputation grows. When you're a niche provider of B2B tech, you can't do spray and pray marketing. It's just not going to work. Like we'll do AdWords and we measure and we do all the LinkedIn stuff. Like we're surgically precise and it's a good payback. We'll do that. And our marketing team is really good at doing that, like very precise stuff. But we're a bit on the cheap side, like in simple terms.
There's a difference between being, I think, measured in what you're doing and being cheap, right? It's not cheap if it's working. Well, look, before we wrap up, I kind of always go through our quick fire round. So let me shoot you a few questions. Other than our podcast, what other podcasts are you listening to right now?
Let me look at my phone. I'll give you a few.
Cool.
I listen to Equity. This is like TechCrunch's one. I listen to BBC Wake Up to Money pretty much every morning on the way to work. And I listen to This Week in Tech, which is like Twit. It's like an American.
Yeah.
So, and those are the 3 I listen to the most.
What are you reading at the moment?
I'm not a big book reader. I try to. A good week for me is I get to read The Economist. I love reading newspapers, and I can't think of the last book I've read this year. I think it's probably a business book. I think there's something on leadership, and I think I read half of it. Like when I read the book, I read the chapters that I want. I don't read the whole thing end to end because I find like there's only a few things I really want to get, and I read those kind of from more of like an exercise. I don't really read like fiction, things like that. But The Economist is like 90% of what I read.
I'm a bit like that with books as well. I pick and choose what I want to want to read. I try to think of them as blog posts as opposed to, a novel. What's the best bit of life advice that you think you received?
I think time heals. Try the best thing. Like no matter what you do or how bad something is, time just if you let time go by, it won't be as bad, or you'll recover. You'll learn from it. Like anything in the present always feels bigger than it is, but when you take a step back and you let time go by, it won't be. It's never as bad as you think it is. It's never as urgent as you think it is.
What's your favorite fintech app? What's your go-to app that you use on your phone?
Kind of just use Monzo. It's not like I used to, like it just works. To be honest, it's probably a near tie between that and Barclays because we use our corporate banking with Barclays. But I'm a personal client of them, and it's just like I wasn't even an early adopter. Like I'm not even going to pretend that. Like, I'm sure I've had it for a few years, but I don't really experiment too much with apps.
I'm literally using your go-to app's arch enemies. I'm a Starling and HSBC guy. So
Starling, to be fair, I have a lot of love for Starling. HSBC, yeah, that I've never had a good experience with those guys. I have some good friends and we have some fantastic relationships with HSBC on the asset management side, but as a bank, they flat out rejected me when I moved here. So I distinctly remember going to HSBC when I came to the UK, and I think this is CAS before they changed, CAS Business School. And they gave me this piece of paper saying, "Welcome to the UK. You're a student, and you're supposed to take that paper to go to the bank to open." And they just flat out refused me. So I went down the street and opened up Barclays and been there since.
My last question: what's one thing that I haven't asked you that you felt that I should have asked you?
People tend to ask us about the whole remote thing because we were a remote firm before. That's always a thing for them because I can't quantify if we've done it better than others, but where I can point is where we've interviewed people and they're like, "Oh, I effing hate remote. I never want to do that because during COVID it was blah blah blah." They'll come and be like, "Okay, this is not what I thought remote was." And so I think we've been remote from day one. Even I stayed in London. A lot of people that's something that I think we've done well, and I think we keep working on it. And that's also, I think, going to ease our way into Europe because we don't have an office culture where all of a sudden, if you're based in Cyprus, you're going to feel like you're just this person who's kind of the European person, and you're kind of alone on an island, literally.
We're remote first as well, and for those that want to be fully remote, it's a huge benefit. They love the flexibility, and it allows us to attract talent from all over the UK and Europe where we want to. So I'm a big advocate for it. I've got no intention of getting an office, and I imagine you're the same.
Yeah, I sit in an office. I actually come into office most weeks 5 days a week, but there's two of us here. But you're right. I don't think we can go back to that because the DNA of the company is such that it's remote first. It's too embedded. If it wasn't for fintech, maybe if I was to do another company in the future, and it'd be interesting if we started office first, because we started remote not because it was some clever thinking. It was just cost. We were kind of bootstrapped. We couldn't afford to have devs in London, and our CTO is in Nottingham, so it was out of necessity. And I was not on that boat at all. I was very much I really hate. And my mind's as soon as we get serious, we're going back to offices. But to my credit, I think my co-founders Yannick and Joe, they kind of made it work, and we tinker. We always trying to make it better, and I think we've got there now. I wouldn't compromise on the quality of our staff to become office first. I think all things considered, I think we'd probably be slightly more efficient if we were in this. Not slightly, we'd be more efficient if I took all the same people I had, the same cost base, and somehow magically put them in the same office and kept them just as happy post their commute, and everything, all the other variables are constant. I think we'd be more efficient because I've seen when we are in person how well people interact, and there's just more chemistry in person and things get done differently. But I wouldn't compromise on the other variables to maximize that one variable of being in the office together.
That's amazing. Karan, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
The FML podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.